For my 67th birthday, my estranged millionaire son sent me a box of Swiss skincare worth thousands of dollars. I thought it was an apology. Feeling undeserving, I re-gifted it to his wife during dinner. When I told him later, he screamed in pure terror. I did not know then that I had just intercepted my own murder weapon and handed it to the only person he could not afford to kill. My name is Evelyn Marlowe, and I was spending the evening of my 67th birthday boiling pasta for one. The silence in my small bungalow on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, was thick enough to choke on. I had set a single placemat on the table, treating myself to a glass of cheap red wine and listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It was a ritual I had grown used to over the last 5 years of widowhood. I did not expect interruptions. I certainly did not expect the doorbell to ring at 7 in the evening. A uniformed courier stood on my porch, holding a box wrapped in shimmering silver paper that looked too expensive to touch. He handed it to me with a polite nod. My hands trembled as I took it inside. Tucked under a silk ribbon was a heavy cream card with embossed lettering. I put on my reading glasses. To the best mother, Brandon. My breath hitched in my throat. My son. My only child. Brandon had been a ghost for the last 8 months, consumed by his life in California as the CEO of a tech startup that the news channels kept calling a unicorn. I placed the box on my kitchen table, feeling a surge of pathetic gratitude. He had remembered. Despite the missed calls and the unanswered texts, he had remembered today. I carefully peeled back the paper. Inside sat a velvet-lined case displaying a set of skincare products from a Swiss brand I had only ever seen in magazines at the dentist's office. The jars were heavy glass, capped in gold, resting like crown jewels. I knew, just from the weight of them, that this box cost more than my mortgage payments for 3 months combined. I stared at my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. The woman staring back was tired. Deep grooves ran from my nose to my mouth, and the skin around my eyes was thin as parchment paper. A thought settled in my chest, heavy and pragmatic. What is the point? It felt wasteful to slather thousands of dollars of serum onto skin that had already lived its life. I picked up my phone and dialed Sienna. My daughter-in-law picked up on the 3rd ring. She was an influencer, always busy with unboxing videos and fashion shoots. But she agreed to come over for a quick birthday dinner when I mentioned I had something for her. The dinner was polite, but stiff. Sienna picked at her pasta, checking her smartwatch every few minutes. When the plates were cleared, I slid the silver box across the table toward her. "I want you to have this," I said, forcing a smile. Sienna's eyes widened as she recognized the brand. "Evelyn. This is the Platinum Cellular line. Do you have any idea how much this costs? Brandon sent this to you." "Oh, honey, look at me." I laughed, waving a hand at my face. "My skin is past saving. I'm happy with my drugstore cream. You're young, you're beautiful, and you're constantly on camera. It would be a sin to waste this on an old woman who barely leaves the house. Take it, please." Sienna hesitated, then smiled, that practiced camera-ready smile. "Well, if you're sure, thank you. Evelyn, I can probably do a really great review on this." She left an hour later, clutching the box like a prize. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. I had been a good mother. I had been a generous mother-in-law. I was standing at the sink washing the dishes, the warm, soapy water soothing my arthritic knuckles. When the phone rang, it was Brandon. I dried my hands on a towel, my heart fluttering He almost never called. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you so much for the gift. It was incredibly generous of you." "Hey, Mom." Brandon's voice came through, tight but strangely solicitous. "Happy birthday. I just wanted to check. Did you like it? The skincare set? It was beautiful. Brandon, really," I said, leaning against the counter. "Did you use it yet?" He asked. The question was sharp, urgent. "Oh, no," I said lightly. "You know me. I'm too old for fancy things like that." I actually invited Sienna over for dinner and gave it to her. She was thrilled. The line went dead silent. "Brandon," I asked. Then, a sound tore through the receiver that I will never forget. It was a guttural, terrified scream, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What did you do?" Brandon shrieked. His voice cracked, high and hysterical. "You gave it to Sienna, all of it, are you crazy?" I stood frozen. My hand went slack, and the ceramic dinner plate I was holding slipped from my fingers. It crashed into the metal sink, shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. But the sound was nothing compared to the panic radiating from my son's voice. "Brandon, calm down," I stammered, confused. "I just thought she would. Don't let her touch it," he roared, the audio distorting. "Mom, listen to me. Call her, tell her not to open it." I stood in my kitchen, the broken plate at my feet, listening to my powerful, wealthy son hyperventilating on the other end of the line. And for the first time in my life, I felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with old age. After the line went dead, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The pasta on my plate had turned cold and stiff, much like the feeling spreading through my limbs. I stared at the dark window, but I was not seeing the Texas night. My mind was drifting back 30 years to a small, grey town in Ohio. I remembered the bone-deep exhaustion of those years. After my husband died in that factory accident, leaving me with a mortgage and a 5-year-old boy, I stopped living for myself entirely. I worked the graveyard shift at a food packaging plant, standing on concrete floors for 10 hours straight until my ankles swelled to the size of grapefruits. Then, I would drive home, wash the smell of processed meat out of my hair, and head to my second job as a cashier at the local grocery store. I smiled at customers who looked through me, hiding my fatigue behind a layer of cheap foundation so that Brandon would never know how close we were to the edge. I did it all so he could have new sneakers for gym class. I did it so he could have that first bulky beige computer when he showed an interest in how machines thought. I paid for extra coding classes while I wore the same winter coat for 12 years. When Brandon got that scholarship to the university in California, I thought my heart would burst with pride. But scholarships did not cover everything in the Bay Area. Without hesitation, I sold my reliable sedan and cashed out every cent of my early retirement fund from Kaleidosphere Logistics. I sent it all to him so he could rent a safe apartment near campus. My friends told me I was foolish to leave myself with no safety net. But I told them, "My son is the biggest investment of my life." He did succeed. He became a star. He founded Bright Flux Labs and raised millions of dollars in capital. But a strange distance grew between us, widening with every zero added to his bank account. Whenever he came back to Texas, his eyes were different. He no longer looked at me with gratitude. He looked at my peeling wallpaper and my laminate countertops with a thinly veiled contempt. Then came Sienna. I remembered meeting her at a conference Brandon flew me out to attend. She was breathtaking, draped in silk and diamonds. In the beginning, she hugged me and called me Mom in a voice like warm honey. But after the wedding, the warmth evaporated. Mum became a crisp, detached Evelyn. I recalled their last visit vividly. They sat on my floral sofa, looking like they were afraid to touch the fabric. "This neighborhood is getting unsafe, Mom," Brandon had said, frowning at the window. "And this house is falling apart. The plumbing is ancient." "We found a lovely assisted living facility near the coast," Sienna had added, tapping on her phone. "It has a spa. Evelyn, you would have people to take care of you properly. We could sell this place and use the equity to pay for your first year." They always framed it as concern, but I felt the pressure. I was an anchor dragging behind their yacht. Over the years, they made me feel that my desire to live in my own home was selfish. Brandon constantly brought up my savings, a modest nest egg of $300,000 I had scraped together after he left. "Let me invest it for you," he would insist. "Leaving it in a savings account is stupid. I can triple it in a month." I always refused. I also refused to put his name on the deed of my house. That was the one time I saw true rage in his eyes. "You are being stubborn," he had snapped. "If something happens to you, the state will take half of it in probate. Put my name on the title. Mom, it is just logic." I had stayed silent then, thinking he was just stressed, thinking he was just a modern man obsessed with efficiency. But sitting in my kitchen now, replaying his terrified scream from earlier that evening, the pieces clicked together in a way that made me nauseous. I closed my eyes and saw the little boy who used to run into the kitchen and wrap his arms around my legs, burying his face in my apron. That boy was gone. In his place was a stranger who had screamed at me not because he was worried about my safety, but because he was terrified of something else. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that the distance between us was not just geography or money. It was something far more sinister. From the moment I handed that gift to his wife, I had unknowingly stepped onto a battlefield I did not even know existed. The phone rang at 9 in the morning, slicing through the heavy silence of my kitchen. It was Sienna. Her voice, usually pitch perfect and full of curated energy, sounded thin and trembling. "Evelyn," she started, skipping the usual pleasantries. "I have the box. I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Did you open the actual jars? Did you break the foil seals?" "No," I answered, gripping the edge of the counter. "I told you last night. I just looked at the box." "Why?" "Because there is a smell," Sienna whispered. "I opened the night cream this morning to do a texture shot for my story. As soon as I peeled the foil back, this sharp, chemical scent hit me. It wasn't floral. It smelled like bleach and bitter almonds. It gave me a migraine instantly." I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it is just the ingredients. It is a medical-grade brand. "Sienna." "No," she insisted, her voice rising. "I know this brand. I have used their samples before. It is supposed to smell like white tea. But Evelyn, that is not the weirdest part. It is Brandon." My stomach tightened. "What about him?" "He woke up while I was holding the jar," she said, and I could hear the shudder in her breath. "He went feral. He snatched the jar out of my hand so hard he almost broke my wrist. He started shouting, asking why I was touching his mother's things. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, and asked, 'Did she use it? Did Mom put it on her face or just smell it?' I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. That was an odd question. If he was worried about me giving away his gift, why would the specific method of application matter? He is probably just stressed about the company, I said, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. Evelyn, look at the packaging. Sienna interrupted. I am coming to pick you up. I looked closer at the box. The logo is shifted to the left by maybe 2 millimeters, and the shrink wrap on the serum bottle. It has glue residue on the bottom. Someone opened this, tampered with it, and sealed it back up. I am taking it to a lab. 40 minutes later. I was sitting in the passenger seat of Sienna's pristine white SUV. We did not speak much. We drove to a private hospital on the north side of town, where Sienna knew a specialist in the toxicology department. For the first time, the icy wall between us seemed to melt, replaced by a shared, vibrating anxiety. We sat in a sterile white examination room. Dr. Vance, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, initially looked amused when Sienna placed the luxury box on his desk. Ladies, usually when cosmetics cause a rash. You see a dermatologist? He joked lightly. Toxicology is for slightly more serious matters. Just test it, Sienna said, her voice hard. Please. He sighed, put on a pair of blue latex gloves, and opened the serum. He took a small swab, dipped it into the thick, pearlescent liquid, and smeared it onto a reactive test strip. He leaned back, waiting. I watched the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked loud and rhythmic. Suddenly, Dr. Vance straightened up. The casual slouch vanished from his posture. He stared at the strip, then looked at the bottle, then back at the strip. He reached for the wall intercom. Nurse, bring me a biohazard containment kit and notify hospital security. I need a rush order on a GCMS analysis. He turned to us, his face pale and serious. Do not touch those bottles. Do not even breathe too deeply near them. Have either of you applied this to your skin? We both said in unison. Dr. Vance exhaled a long breath. This is a preliminary result, but the serum is laced with a high concentration of a synthetic cardiac inhibitor. It is a compound that absorbs through the skin. It accumulates in the bloodstream. I stared at him, my hands shaking in my lap. What does that mean? It means, the doctor said, looking directly into my eyes, that if a person used this daily, as part of a skincare routine, their heart muscle would slowly weaken. Within 2 or 3 months, they would suffer a massive cardiac arrest. And because the chemical breaks down quickly after death, it would look exactly like a natural heart attack or a stroke, especially in a woman of your age. The room went silent. The white walls seemed to close in on me. Who gave you this? Mrs. Marlowe, Doctor. Vance asked gently. Because this is not a manufacturing error. This level of toxicity is deliberate. It is very hard to prove poisoning without the source. But you have brought the weapon right to me. I looked at the silver box, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I thought of Brandon's panicked voice on the phone. Did Mom put it on her face? He wasn't afraid I had given away a gift. He was afraid I had handed his wife a loaded gun. My son, I whispered, the words tearing my throat. My son sent it to me for my birthday. I sat there in the blinding white light of the hospital, realizing that the child I had sacrificed my entire life to raise had decided that my life was the final cost of his ambition. He did not want to make me feel beautiful. He wanted to kill me quietly, efficiently, and without a trace. I arranged to meet Brandon at a quiet coffee shop in downtown Austin called the Cedar Press. It was early afternoon. the lull between the lunch rush and the evening crowd. I sat at a corner table, my hands clasped tightly around a cup of herbal tea I had no intention of drinking. 2 booths behind me, facing away, sat Sienna and a woman named Monica Reyes, a private investigator we had hired that morning. On the table between them lay a small, high-fidelity recording device concealed under a napkin. Brandon arrived 10 minutes late. He was wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000, but he looked like he had slept in it. His tie was loose, his eyes were bloodshot, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as he walked toward me, radiating a nervous, frantic energy that made my stomach turn. "Mom," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. He didn't kiss my cheek. "Why did we have to meet here? I have a flight back to California in 3 hours. I have investors breathing down my neck." I did not smile. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the skincare box, now sealed inside a clear plastic evidence bag with red tape across the top. I placed it gently on the wooden table between us. Brandon froze. His gaze snapped from the box to my face, his jaw working silently. "Explain this to me." "Brandon," I said, my voice soft but steady. "Why did the toxicology report from the hospital say that if I used this every day, my heart would stop beating within a few months?" Brandon let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, but it sounded brittle. "Oh my God. Is this a joke? Who have you been talking to? You're letting yourself get brainwashed by internet conspiracies." "Mom, you think the FBI cares about what a jar of cream and an old lady in Texas? I have the lab report." "Brandon," I interrupted, cutting through his deflection. "And the hospital has already notified the authorities about a potential biological hazard. They found the needle marks in the foil seals. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse." He licked his lips, his eyes darting to the door. You went to the police," he hissed, leaning across the table. "Not yet." I lied. "I wanted to hear it from you first." "Why?" "Brandon, I am your mother." He stared at me, and then the mask crumbled. The successful CEO vanished, replaced by a petulant, cornered child. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the cutlery rattle. "Because you are so stubborn," he whispered furiously, his voice shaking with rage. "I asked you a dozen times to sell that house. I asked you to sign over your savings so I could manage them. But no, you just had to hold on to everything. Do you have any idea what kind of hole I am in if you live another 10 years? I will be bankrupt. I will be in prison." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. "What are you talking about?" "Bright Flux is gone." "Mom," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a panic. "The company is drowning in debt. I made some bad calls on crypto futures and junk bonds. I needed liquidity. I used your personal information to open 3 escrow accounts to move the money around because my credit is shot. If the auditors look at those accounts while you are alive, I am done. But if you die, naturally, of a stroke or heart failure, the accounts close. The life insurance pays out. The fraud gets buried in probate. It was the only way to clean the slate." I looked at him, horror struck. He was talking about my death as if it were a clerical error he needed to correct. "You wanted to kill me to hide your theft," I stated flatly. "It is not theft. It is an advance on my inheritance," he argued, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You are old. Mom, you are alone? You do not need that money. I am building something that changes the world, and you were just standing in the way." He leaned back, looking almost relieved to have said it, as if his logic was irrefutable. I took a deep breath, preparing to ask the question that haunted me the most. "And what about Sienna? I told you I gave the box to her. You know she has a heart condition from when she was a teenager. What if she had used it?" Brandon waved his hand dismissively, and that gesture broke my heart more than the poison. "She is young," he said, his tone devoid of empathy. "It is a low dose. It works by accumulation in older tissue. It would not kill her. It might make her sick for a week, maybe mess with her rhythm a bit. But she would be fine. I would have taken it away before she used too much." He had calculated the dosage. He had weighed the risk of poisoning his wife against the benefit of killing his mother, and he had decided it was an acceptable margin of error. Behind him, I saw Monica reach out and press a button on the recording device. Next to her, Sienna was staring at the back of her husband's head, silent tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth to stifle a sob. My son had not just confessed to attempted murder. He had just incinerated his marriage and his life, and he was too arrogant to even turn around and see the ashes. That night, I sat in the center of my darkened living room with the air conditioning humming a low, steady drone. On the coffee table, the small recorder played Brandon's voice on a loop. I listened to him call me a burden. I listened to him weigh the dosage of poison against the convenience of his inheritance. Each word should have felt like a physical blow. But strange enough, the pain had stopped. Instead of grief, I felt a peculiar sensation in my back, as if my spine, curved from decades of bowing down and smoothing things over, was finally snapping straight. For the first time, I allowed myself to look at the past without the soft focus of motherly love. I remembered the grade-changing incident in middle school where I blamed the teacher. I remembered the time he took $20 from the church donation envelope, and I replaced it so no one would know. I called it protecting him. I called it love. Now, sitting in the dark, I saw it for what it truly was. I had not raised a son. I had fed a monster who believed he was immune to consequences. The next morning, I walked into the office of Harold Pierce. Harold had handled my husband's insurance paperwork years ago, and he looked older now, his desk cluttered with files. I sat down, smoothed my skirt, and looked him in the eye. "Harold," I said, my voice devoid of tremors. "My son intentionally tried to kill me." Harold stopped writing. He listened in silence as I played the recording and laid out the toxicology report. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Evelyn," he said heavily, "you have enough here to put him in federal prison for a long time, but you have to make a choice. You can be the mother who forgives him and lets him destroy you again, or you can let the consequences arrive. Once we start this, there is no turning back." I had spent 40 years praying for the strength to forgive. But I realized then that my forgiveness had just been a fancy word for cowardice. I had forgiven him because I was afraid of being alone. I had forgiven him because I did not want to face the truth. I am done forgiving. "Harold," I said, "I want justice." Later that afternoon, Sienna came to my house. Her eyes were swollen almost shut, but her jaw was set in a hard line. She sat at my kitchen table, twisting her wedding ring. "He used them," she whispered, her voice cracking. I went through his laptop. Brandon used photos of the twins for a marketing campaign for a charity that does not exist. He raised money using our children's faces and funneled it into his debt. I cannot let him be around them. I cannot live like this. I reached across the table and took her hand. For years, we had been polite strangers, separated by her wealth and my poverty. Now, we were allies in a trench. We are going to stop him, I told her. Not just for me, for them. We spent the next week working with Harold and Monica, the private investigator. We became architects of his destruction. We gathered every piece of financial paper that bore my name. We pulled bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers. We found contracts where my signature had been forged, a clumsy digital copy pasted onto PDFs. We built a dossier that was not just a complaint. It was a bomb waiting for a fuse. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction as I organized the files. I was no longer the frail old woman waiting for a phone call. I was a hunter setting a trap. He wanted a quiet death for me, I said to Harold as we sealed the final envelope. He wanted me to slip away in the night so he could keep his reputation. So, I think I will give him the exact opposite. I will give him the loudest, most public fall imaginable. Following Harold's advice, I acted with a speed that would have terrified the old Evelyn. I put the bungalow on the market on a Tuesday, and thanks to the overheating housing market in Austin, I accepted a cash offer for $50,000 over the asking price by Friday. I didn't even look back as I handed over the keys. I moved into a high-rise condo in downtown Austin, a building with a 24-hour doorman and keycard-restricted elevators. I wasn't looking for luxury. I was building a fortress where Brandon and his associates couldn't reach me. With the check from the house sale and my life savings, I sat down with a new financial planner Harold had recommended. We didn't look at high-risk stocks. We bought safe municipal bonds and funneled the majority of my assets into an irrevocable trust named for myself and my 2 grandchildren. I want to be very clear. I told the planner, my voice steady. My son, Brandon, is to be explicitly excluded as a beneficiary. Under no circumstances is he to have access to a single cent. Simultaneously, I walked into the local branch of my bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a young woman who looked concerned as I laid out my ID and the affidavit of identity theft Harold had drafted. I did not open these 3 accounts. I said firmly, I am formally reporting unauthorized use of my personal data. I want a full fraud investigation started immediately. By doing this, I wasn't just closing accounts. I was tripping the internal alarms of the banking system. I knew that within days, the compliance officers would start freezing assets linked to my social security number, which would inadvertently freeze the capital Brandon was using to juggle his debts. I decided I needed to look the part of the woman I was becoming. I went to a salon and had my thin, shoulder-length grey hair cut into a sharp, practical bob and dyed a warm, rich chestnut. I went to a department store and bought 3 tailored blazers and trousers. I wasn't trying to look young. I was trying to look like someone who couldn't be bullied. When I looked in the mirror, I finally saw someone who wasn't bowing her head in apology. I also started seeing a therapist who specialized in familial abuse. It was painful work. We role-played conversations where I practiced setting boundaries. You have to stop feeling guilty for surviving. Dr. Aris told me. Saying no to your abuser is not a sin. It is an act of dignity. While I fortified my life in Texas, Sienna was operating behind enemy lines in California. She played the part of the supportive wife perfectly. But whenever Brandon was in meetings or passed out from stress, she was at work. She used her phone to photograph vendor contracts, emails, and bank transfer receipts. We held secret video calls late at night. Sienna looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with the thrill of the hunt. "Evelyn, it is a Ponzi scheme," she whispered during one call, holding up a printout to the camera. "Look at this. The Future Scholars Fund he talks about. It is empty. He moves money in from new investors, pays off the interest on the old loans, and calls it a scholarship donation. And look at the signature." I squinted at the screen. There, at the bottom of a loan guarantee for $200,000, was my name. It was my signature, but it was too perfect. It was a digital copy he had lifted from an old birthday card or a check and pasted onto the document. "I never signed that," I said, feeling a cold rage tighten my chest. I was in the hospital getting my hip checked the day that is dated. "He is sloppy because he never thought anyone would check," Sienna said. "He thought you would be dead by now. We mapped out the strategy like generals. First, I would secure my safety and finances. Second, we would let the banks freeze his liquidity, causing him to panic. And finally, when he was scrambling, we would hand everything, the toxicology report, the recording, the fake contracts, and the embezzlement proof to the FBI and the press simultaneously. If he wants a war," I told Sienna as we ended the call, "we are going to give him a blitzkrieg." The Bright Flux Labs fundraising gala was held in a ballroom in downtown Los Angeles that smelled of white lilies and expensive perfume. My son's face was plastered on oversized banners hanging from the ceiling, his jawline retouched to perfection, accompanied by the slogan, "Innovating with Compassion," from the back of the room. I watched Sienna standing next to him near the stage. She looked stunning in a floor-length emerald gown, but I knew the smile frozen on her face was a shield. She was playing her part in the charade of the perfect family one last time. I had received an invitation in the mail 2 weeks prior. It was a courtesy invite, the kind sent by an assistant who assumed I would never actually make the trip from Texas. They thought I would be too intimidated by the travel, the cost, or the sheer grandeur of the event. They were wrong. I had purchased a VIP ticket with my own money, booked a first-class flight, and walked into that ballroom wearing my new tailored cream suit and sensible low heels. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering sequined dresses. I was one of the few people there with grey hair, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to shrink away. I stood tall, sipping sparkling water, observing the investors and politicians who were clapping for my son. They looked at him with admiration. I looked at him and saw a man who had priced my life at less than his quarterly debt payments. The lights dimmed, and Brandon took the stage. He was charismatic. I had to give him that. He spoke with a smooth, practiced cadence about the future of biotechnology. "We are not just building apps," he said, his voice echoing through the high-quality speakers. "We are building a legacy. We must honor the generations that came before us. My own mother taught me the value of sacrifice, and it is that spirit of care that drives Bright Flux every single day." Standing in the shadows near the press pit, I felt a physical wave of nausea. Every word was a slap in the face. He was using the very love he had exploited to sell his lies. Then came the charity auction. The MC, a bouncy man with a headset, took the microphone to announce the opening items and to start us off. "We have a luxurious treat. Lot number 4 is a premium Swiss wellness package for the discerning senior, donated by our partners in Geneva." A large screen behind him lit up. My breath caught in my throat. It was a high-resolution photo of the exact skincare set Brandon had sent me. The logo was there. The gold caps were there. But the image of the elderly model next to it had been airbrushed to look unnaturally happy. "Do I hear $1,000 to start the MC?" shouted. I did not wait. I stepped out from the shadows and raised my paddle high in the air. The motion was sharp and commanding. "I have a question before I bid," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the momentary lull between the MC's patter, it carried clearly to the stage. Heads turned. The MC blinked, blinded by the spotlight. "I am sorry, madam. We are starting the bid at I am Evelyn Marlowe," I announced, walking further into the light until I was standing just below the stage. "I am Brandon's mother." A ripple of excitement went through the room. A photographer near me swung his lens in my direction. Brandon, who had been smiling graciously from the side of the stage, froze. His face went the color of cottage cheese. I held the microphone that a confused assistant had handed to me. I looked directly at my son. "I just want to know," I said, my tone conversational but deadly clear. "Does this set contain the same ingredients as the one my son sent me for my 67th birthday? Because the toxicology department at the hospital in Texas told me that if I used that gift daily, I would have been dead from heart failure before I could even RSVP to this gala." The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the space. Brandon stumbled forward, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Mom, you are confused. That is quite a joke. What a sense of humor she has. Everyone. A wonderful evening." It was not a joke to the doctor who filed the police report. "Brandon," I said, dropping the microphone onto a nearby table with a heavy thud. The flash of camera bulbs erupted like lightning. Reporters were already flipping open laptops and typing furiously into their phones. I saw the words toxicology and Evelyn Marlowe trending before I even turned away. At the head table, Sienna stood up. She did not look at her husband. She picked up her clutch, walked calmly toward the exit, and tapped the screen of her phone. With one press of her finger, she sent an email to the lead investigator at the FBI and a senior reporter at the Los Angeles Times. Attached to that email were 500 pages of forged contracts, bank statements, and a recording of Brandon confessing to attempted murder. As I watched my son trying to stammer through an explanation to a room full of horrified donors, I knew the pedestal had crumbled. The perfect son was gone. All that remained was a criminal sweating under the hot lights. The fallout from the gala was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. Just 48 hours after I dropped the microphone on that stage, a massive investigative article went live on a major national news site. They ran with the headline, "Charity or Crime? The Dark Secrets of Bright Flux Labs." And right there in the second paragraph was my quote about the poison. The internet did what it does best. Within hours, hashtags demanding justice were trending, and the carefully curated image of Brandon as a saintly innovator was being dissected by millions of strangers. The government moved even faster. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal investigation, triggering an emergency freeze on every asset linked to the company. That included Brandon's personal accounts and, crucially, the fraudulent accounts he had opened in my name. Sienna told me later about the moment reality finally hit him. He had woken up in a luxury hotel suite in Beverly Hills, hungover and terrified, and tried to order room service. When he handed the waiter his black card, the machine declined it. He tried a second card. Declined. He tried a corporate card. Declined. "I am sorry, Mr. Marlowe," the waiter had said, likely backing away from the fury rising in my son's eyes. "The system says these cards have been seized by federal order." Brandon reportedly threw his phone against the wall, screaming that I was a traitor, that I had ruined him. He did not understand that I hadn't ruined him. I had simply turned on the lights. While he was raging in a hotel room he could no longer pay for, Sienna was executing her exit. She had already moved the children to a rental property paid for with cash she had withdrawn weeks ago. She served him with divorce papers that same afternoon, listing fraud and endangerment of the family as primary causes. Her lawyer, a shark of a woman named Patricia, immediately filed for an emergency protective order to keep him away from the twins. My role in the dismantling was quieter but far more damaging. I received a call from a special agent named Miller. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, his voice professional and grave. "We would like to thank you for coming forward. We need you to come to our Los Angeles field office to give a formal statement regarding the identity theft and the biological evidence." I sat in a grey interview room for 5 hours. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I laid out the documents Harold had prepared. I showed them the bank statements where Brandon had forged my signature. I handed over printed emails where he had written to a creditor. "My mother is very frail. Her heart is failing. I expect the probate process to clear these debts within 6 months." "He was betting on my death," I told Agent Miller, pointing to the date on the email. "He was using my life expectancy as collateral for a loan." The investigators were thorough. A joint task force involving the FDA and the police traced the origin of the skincare set. They found that it had not come from the Swiss manufacturer at all. It had been purchased through a shell company registered in Nevada, a company that listed Brandon's personal assistant as the sole proprietor. The assistant, terrified of prison time, flipped on him immediately. She admitted that Brandon had instructed her to buy medical-grade samples from a black market chemical supplier and repackage them. But the most chilling detail came from the forensic accountants at the bank. When they overlaid Brandon's transfer records with my medical history, a pattern emerged that made even the hardened agents look sick. Every time I had a doctor's appointment for my blood pressure, Brandon would authorize a massive transfer of funds or sign a risky short-term loan. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively tracking my health decline like it was a stock market trend, timing his financial crimes to align with my expected funeral. By the end of the week, Brandon was running from one law firm to another, desperate for representation. But the legal community is small, and the evidence against him was radioactive. High-profile defense attorneys took one look at the headlines, the toxicology report, and the freezing orders, and they all said the same thing. "I cannot take your case, Mr. Marlowe," one lawyer reportedly told him. "You do not have the money to pay my retainer, and frankly, you do not have a defense." My son was in freefall. He had no money, no family, no company, and no lawyers. And as I sat in my temporary apartment, watching the news coverage of his empire crumbling, I felt a deep, resonant peace. He had tried to stop my heart, but all he had done was restart my life. The federal trial began on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom that smelled of floor wax and old wood. Brandon sat at the defense table, and I had to give credit to his legal team. They had scrubbed him clean. Gone was the frantic, sweating man from the gala. In his place sat the image of a misunderstood prodigy, wearing a navy suit and a tie that whispered modesty. He looked at the jury with wide, sorrowful eyes. I on the other hand, wore my dark funeral suit and the string of pearls my late husband gave me for our 30th anniversary. I walked slowly, not because I was frail, but because I wanted the jury to see exactly who he had tried to kill. The prosecution wasted no time. They built a wall of evidence, brick by brick. Dr. Vance testified about the lethal dosage in the serum. The bank investigator projected complex charts showing the flow of stolen money. Then came Sienna. She looked tired, her hands trembling as she took the oath. But her voice was steel. "He told me once," Sienna said, looking directly at the jury, "that if Evelyn passed away, our cash flow problems would disappear. He said, 'If Mom dies, it will be easier for all of us.'" Brandon's defense attorney, a slick man named Mr. Kincaid, tried to spin a different tale. He argued that Bright Flux Labs had enemies. He suggested a competitor had intercepted the package to frame Brandon. He called the financial fraud clerical errors made by an overwhelmed accounting department. It was a desperate story, but Kincaid told it well. Then, it was my turn. I took the stand and placed my hand on the Bible. As I recounted the story from the hard years in Ohio to the moment I handed the gift to Sienna, I kept my eyes on my son. He refused to look at me. Mr. Kincaid stood up for cross-examination, smiling that predatory smile lawyers save for the elderly. He tried to paint me as confused. A lonely, paranoid old woman. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, leaning on the podium. "You admit you never actually saw your son put poison in the bottle. Isn't it true that you have felt abandoned by him? Isn't it possible you have constructed this entire villainous narrative because you are hurt that he moved away? You are a religious woman. Are you not? Why are you here trying to destroy your son instead of forgiving him?" The courtroom went quiet. It was a low blow, designed to shame me. I leaned into the microphone. "I am a religious woman, Mr. Kincaid. And because I am a mother, I know my duty. A parent does not love a child by hiding their crimes. That is not love. That is complicity. Forgiveness is something I pray for in private, but it does not mean I will obstruct justice to save him from the consequences of his own greed." Several jurors nodded. Kincaid looked flushed. He sat down. The prosecutor stood up for the final blow. "Your Honor, the people would like to introduce Exhibit G into evidence. A digital recording taken at the Cedar Press Cafe. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. It was clear as a bell. You are old, Mom. You are alone. You do not need that money. If you die, naturally, the accounts close. The fraud gets buried." Then came the sound of his panic when I asked about Sienna. "She is young. It is a low dose. She would be fine." The sound of his own voice discussing the acceptable collateral damage of his wife seemed to snap something inside Brandon. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The good son mask dissolved into sheer animal panic. "That is out of context," Brandon screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the prosecution table, and then, wildly, at Sienna in the gallery. "It was her. She is the one who wanted the money. She hates my mother. She tampered with the box I was just trying to cover for her." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. The prosecutor did not even shout. He simply held up a piece of paper. "We have the purchase order for the toxins, signed by the defendant. We have the emails from his personal server approving the plan, and we have the transfer of funds from his account to the shell company that bought the poison. Mrs. Marlowe had nothing to do with this." Brandon stood there, his chest heaving, his finger still pointing at his wife. But no one was looking at him with pity anymore. They were looking at a drowning man trying to pull everyone else down with him. I watched him unravel, and I felt a profound, heavy sadness. He had just convicted himself louder than any jury ever could. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. I spent those days sitting on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles turned white. A part of me knew the evidence was overwhelming, but another part of me, the part that had spent decades shielding him, still could not quite believe that my life had come to this moment. I was a mother, waiting to hear if the state agreed that her son was a monster. When the bailiff finally called us back in, the air in the room was heavy enough to crush a person. The foreman stood up. He did not look at Brandon. He looked straight at the judge and read the verdict. "Guilty," he said, "regarding the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty," he repeated for the counts of wire fraud and identity theft. Each repetition of the word felt like the snip of a giant pair of shears, severing the toxic cord that had bound me to Brandon's ambition for so long. Brandon slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table. Then, as if realizing the finality of it, he whipped his head around to look at me. His face was twisted in a rictus of pure, childish hate. "You ruined my life," he screamed, straining against the marshals who moved to restrain him. "You should have protected me. You are my mother." His voice echoed off the high ceiling, a chilling reminder that even at the very end, he did not understand the concept of responsibility. He truly believed that my duty as a mother included letting him kill me for a profit. The judge was unmoved. He sentenced Brandon to 25 years in federal prison, along with a mandate for full financial restitution. We all knew Brandon was bankrupt, and I would likely never see a dime, but the money did not matter. What mattered was the court record stating, in black and white, that Evelyn Marlowe was a victim, not a co-conspirator. After the sentencing, a guard allowed me 5 minutes with him in a small holding room divided by a thick pane of reinforced glass. Brandon was pacing like a caged animal. When he saw me, he slammed his palms against the glass. "Mom, listen," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "We can appeal. You can tell them you were confused. If you talk to the press, if you say you made a mistake, maybe they will reduce the sentence. I can change. Mum, I promise." I looked at the man on the other side of the glass. I searched for the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. But he was gone. In his place was a stranger who had chosen, over and over again, to trample on everything I had ever given him. I picked up the receiver on my side of the wall. "From today on," I said, my voice steady and dry. "Con, you do not have the right to use me as an excuse for anything ever again. I did not say I forgave him. I did not say I hated him. I simply hung up the phone and turned my back as I walked out of the room. I expected to feel a crushing weight of grief. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It was not a painful emptiness. It was the feeling of a room that had finally been cleared of clutter, waiting to be furnished with something new. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding California afternoon sun. Sienna was waiting for me by the curb, holding the hands of my 2 grandchildren. I had insisted they stay away from the trial, but today, I needed to see them. I caught my reflection in the tinted glass of the courthouse doors. I was not looking down at my shoes. My chin was up. I was looking the world in the eye. When I returned to Austin, I settled into my new apartment. I made myself a cup of tea and opened a fresh, leather-bound journal. For the first time, I wrote for myself, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a survivor. My rich son sent me a gift to kill me. I wrote, the ink dark and permanent on the page. I gave him back a different gift, the truth, justice, and my permanent absence from his life. I closed the book and walked out onto the balcony. The city lights of Austin twinkled below me like a sea of stars. I knew the years ahead would carry the scars of this betrayal. I knew there would be nights when I would weep for the son I wished I had. But as I took a sip of hot tea and let the night air cool my face, I knew one thing for certain. The rest of this life belonged to me. It was mine to spend, mine to enjoy, and mine to dictate. And for the first time in 67 years, that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from, so please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on what you would have done in my shoes. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe out there.